Firstly, try to frame what we mean by social design. So actually, Lucy and Guy and some of the other people in the room have already given definitions of social design linked to the HRC report there. Social design being those types of design which integrate participatory approaches and deliver towards collective and social ends over and above commercial ends. Thomas Mackerson, when he tries to talk about an uncloudy the issue of sort of the cloudy issue, as he refers to it, or the murky issue of social design, echoes that and talks about the fact that social design is defined according to its modus operandi. So again, the participatory approaches and also the aim towards social ends. So that's the sort of social design. That's what I'm going to use as the frame for what we mean by social design as the starting point. And then also, what do we mean by political? And here I'm referring to Chantal Mouffe, who talks about the difference between politics and the political, making the statement that the political is concerned with the antagonism that's inherent in human relations. So really it's around contestation and agonism, and that politics is more to do with the practices, discourses of institutions that seek to establish and maintain certain orders, so perhaps a political party or political system. Then we can consider what about design for politics and design as politics. And here, Carl de Salvo and his work within adversarial design can be drawn upon. He makes the point that design for politics is design that supports and is concerned with the means by which organisations, for example, a government, may be put together and held together. So it's designed, an example of that might be this sort of electronic voting system. So it's supporting supporting governance, design that supports the current processes of governance and systems of governance. Whereas political design is, again, he frames political design as a contest, as an ongoing contest between forces or ideals. So it's about dissent, it's about debate, it's about dialogue. He leverages examples like $1 Million Blocks, which is a project from a while ago now from the Spatial Information Design Lab. What they were doing was making visible the fact that actually by looking at where prison populations came from, they were able to make visible the fact that there was $1 million spent on this particular block in custodial services. Now, if those $1 million were spent in a different way, perhaps in sort of prevention rather than punishment, then there might be different outcomes. So it's the design that makes visible and opens up a space for debate and sort of contested debate. So that's what we're talking about, political design. Another example that I particularly like is this idea around, so would we say that these feral robot dogs by Natalie Jeremijenko, would we say they're political design? I'd argue that they are, because they make these sort of issues around pollution, climate, these sorts of issues, well, pollution particularly, more visible to us, and sort of can assemble a public. And once that public's assembled, then we can start to debate and discuss what we might do about that. And obviously the design of it itself, and it comes as there's instructions on how you might build your own, opens up the space again for others to be involved in that monitoring process and so on and so forth. Would we say that this work by Cambridge Analytica, the design of the system that sort of whispered in people's ears and put them in an echo chamber to sort of try to promote certain decisions towards voting for Brexit, would we say that's political design? No, would be the answer to that for me. And the reason it's not is because it's not opening it up. It's doing the exact opposite to that. Actually, it's trying to close it down by doing the direct targeting, the £2.7 million pounds spent through Facebook to target those adverts with to reinforce sort of people's perceptions, rather than opening it up for discussion and discussion around that and contestation around that. So it's the opposite of what Hannah Arendt would call the space of appearances. It's the opposite of that. It doesn't put it in the public domain where it can be debated and negotiated and contested. It's the absolute opposite. It closes it away and reinforces people's prejudices. So participatory design, according to Simonson and Robertson here, they talk about the idea that participation design is a political process. They talk about the idea that it's emancipatory and it's got a commitment to making sure that everybody's voice is heard in the decision-making process that's going to affect them. Shifting users' roles from being informants to being legitimate and acknowledged participants. The idea that we're in a position where we're naming someone else's legitimacy sort of puts some question marks for me around sort of where exactly how where that framing is coming from, and perhaps is some of the question marks we put around the notion of sort of the social in social design, which we can come on to in a minute. I'm going to talk really briefly, I'll give an example of the Public Collaboration Lab, which is a piece of work that myself and colleagues have been doing, including Lara here, since about 2015-16 we started this work. It's a collaboration between Camden Council and University Arts London initially, looking at where the synergy is between local government's operational objectives, supporting improving resident outcomes, and design education's learning objectives, and through research and teaching. Typically around supporting citizen engagement and collaboration in finding place-based solutions to our local challenges. We delivered a series of collaborative design experiments. Within the funding, there was time and space for 6 projects dealing with different service areas and different agendas linked to council operations. Since then, we've now delivered 21 projects, which we can talk about at greater length another time. But it frames the idea of design education as a social resource and the community context as a learning environment. So where we found some matches in terms of synergy, consultation and engagement, finding new ways to engage residents in surfacing their needs, desires and opinions and perspectives in the context of libraries and planning, for example. Service transformation around the integration of youth services, around the changing and eventually replacement or dissolution of home library services. Looking at behaviour change, how do we change our behaviours in terms of healthy diet and active lifestyles? How do we change our behaviours in terms of recycling and reuse? Looking at what the council calls community resilience, supporting people in overcrowded accommodation to be able to redesign their furniture and redesign their spaces and adapt their spaces to suit their needs. And lessons from the lab then in relation to this is social design political. What we found is that actually, although we're looking at participatory activities and collaborative activities, this reference to the Matryoshka doll comes from Per Anders Hilgren uses this as an example, which resonates a lot with the work that we've been doing. The idea being that which bit is participatory, which bit is collaborative, and how collaborative. You know, it's like they're projects nested within projects. There's a workshop in a project, in a programme, which bit of this is collaborative and how collaborative, and who's involved in that decision making at what stage in the game. So who's participating at what stage in the process? Obviously, collaboration for us is about agency and power, the agency to act and the power to decide. Who really gets the opportunity to decide on the structure of that programme or that project from the outset? And again, it depends absolutely on at what point you involve people. In the work we're doing with local government, no point in consulting someone or even co-producing a new way of delivering a service if you do so at a point and it's too late to actually implement because of the way in which government process and the timelines and rails that they're running on are existing. And then also, there's a lot of conversation often in this field around management of expectations. When we start to collaborate with other people, we need to manage their expectations. Well, that's not collaboration, is it? You know, might be able to negotiate expectations, but as soon as we start managing other people's expectations, then we're no longer collaborating. We're part giving, they're not part taking of whatever's going on in the programme or whatever's going on in the project. We can talk more when we've got more time. So is this work social design? With its social means and its social ends? Well, I would say it depends, actually. It looks like a good fit for social design, but when we're redesigning the services, when we're redesigning public services, is the motivation for that social good, or is the motivation for that cost savings? Or is it both? Does it depend who you talk to work out what the motivation is? So is this social design? It depends. So is this design for politics, or is this political design? Well, I would say it's both. When we're doing the consultation, when we're doing the engagement, yeah, that's sitting within an existing political process and it's supporting that existing method of governance and political process. But actually, within some of those workshops, within some of those engagements, it does give the opportunity for publics to assemble, for dissent to occur, and for discussion to occur. And so that's why I would argue that it's both political and it is designed for politics. So is social design political? Well, probably is what I would say, and probably because it depends on the extent to which there is diversity of participation and collaboration. It also depends on the extent to which it truly does accommodate agonism within its processes. If it really is, or maybe that's how we qualify social design. Now, is it really allowing for that sort of dissent to occur, or would that stop a project being completed? So my conclusion for now is that social design actually might have a potential to make politics more political if it's delivered as social design in its sort of utopian. Is social design utopian? One of the other questions that will be coming in a minute, in its utopian form, where it's all about the social ends, and actually it's all about this sort of political, agonistic context and setting.